Okay, well, welcome everyone. It's great to be here with you all. My name is Matthew Hora. I'm an associate professor of adult and higher education at University of Wisconsin-Madison. And this is a 1-hour workshop on embedding career readiness skills in the curriculum. And before we begin, this is being recorded, and if you could mute yourself, this will be put on our CCWT YouTube communications page. I've also posted the slides from this talk, which I'll show in a minute, on slideshare.net. I put the link in at the very top of the chat, along with a website for our center where you can see upcoming workshops, seminars, and so forth. But in a nutshell, I put together this 1-hour workshop because I have a 7-week online faculty development course that I'm currently revising. And I wanted to condense it into a 1-hour workshop for people that don't have the time or the energy to commit to a 7-week intensive faculty development course. But I'm also revising that course. And so this is a way for me to workshop some ideas, new teaching strategies, new ways of thinking about this problem of career readiness and skills development. So any feedback about this workshop, the content, anything like that, please let me know. For those of you who joined the January workshop, you'll see that I've totally mixed it up based on some feedback. And some of these remarks are based on a talk I just gave at an AAC&U meeting, where some of our work is about taking this idea of helping faculty embed these skills in the classroom to scale it up for more institutional transformation. But today we're going to focus on skills and how faculty can embed them in their courses, and we'll focus on teamwork today. And I'm going to share my screen, hopefully. All right. So again, this is a short workshop on embedding career readiness across the curriculum. And there's contact information down below. Please don't hesitate to reach out with any questions, comments, etc. And let's get started. The goals of this session are, first of all, to talk about some of the limitations with the current discourses around career readiness, skills, soft skills, non-cognitive skills, and so forth. Then we'll talk about the cultural nature of skills. And I want to introduce you to this idea of cultural scripts, a different way to think about skills themselves and then how to teach them. And then I want you to reflect on some cultural scripts in your own disciplines, because essentially that is at the core of the research we've been doing here at UW-Madison and the faculty development that I've developed from that research, is that we have to think about discipline and culture-specific scripts as we teach our students skills that are in all those skills lists that we've seen. And then finally, I'm hoping that we can, and I got to figure out how to move these windows so I could see my own slides. We're going to focus on teamwork. In the longer course that I have, we talk about oral communication, critical thinking, self-regulated learning, and teamwork. But for these 1-hour workshops, I'm just focusing on one skill. Okay. So some of the broader context to these ideas are, first of all, everybody's talking about career readiness in higher education and in secondary schools. We know that, and for researchers that have been around for a while and observers of higher ed, it's long overdue. Outside of community colleges and professional programs, there hasn't been enough attention on postgraduate outcomes and careers. And so here we are. Everybody's talking about it. It's a good thing. But there's some limitations that I think we have to really recognize and really figure out how to address if we're going to be really effective in helping our students succeed post-graduation. The first has to do with the construct of career readiness. It's got some problems, just like the idea of soft skills has problems. It's not just about terminology, but career readiness has a similar issue to this idea of employability, which has been studied around the world for decades. And some of the early ideas of employability were that all a student needs is to have soft skills to get a job. That was kind of the state of the art in the 80s. Career readiness, unfortunately, sometimes is conflated with possession of career readiness skills or soft skills. And what the research has shown is that it's not just far more complex a phenomenon, how people get jobs, social networks, the type of credentials they have, hiring discrimination, business cycles, pandemics. But it's how we talk about students to prepare themselves for the world post-graduation involves a lot more than 10 soft skills. There's some psychosocial attributes such as resilience or career adaptability. There's definitely technical knowledge. There's development of social capital and social networks. It's a whole host of dimensions that students need in order to become truly career ready. And I've been delving into the K-12 research recently on career readiness survey scales, and they're far more nuanced and multidimensional than what we see in higher education. And so I think it's time that we kind of crack open this construct and recognize how complex it really is. The second issue has to do with one of the things that a lot of post-secondary institutions are really pushing for their students in order to become career ready, and that's work-based learning. One of the research areas we have at our center is on internships. And our data are pretty clear that they're only being taken by between 20 and 30% of all students. And that has declined since the pandemic. And once you delve a little bit into the crosstabs about demographics, there's a lot of students that want to take these positions, but can't because they can't afford to work for free. Their course load's too heavy. They don't know about opportunities, so it's a lack of information. There's a lot of students out there that want these positions, but the supply is simply not there. And so that's kind of leading to this idea of work integrated learning, which has really taken off in other countries, not so much in the United States yet, but especially Australia. They're shifting from sending students out to off-campus work-based learning to incorporating career ideas and skill development in the classroom. Part of that's an equity issue because the students are there, but it's also just a way of thinking about how can we improve learning, because WIL is really dovetailing with the active learning movement, which is a really good thing. And then the last issue that I think many of us know about, career services tend to be fragmented and siloed on our campuses. There's a whole lot of wonderful efforts to centralize career services, make them more accessible, but still, the surveys vary, but it's about half of students actually visit career services by the time they are a senior. And many more say that it's faculty and advisors that give them the most direct and concrete and useful information about careers. And so part of this thinking is we need to find some way in the middle to think about how to get career-related information to all students while tapping into career services, but also taking advantage of the role of the instructor. There we go. So the career readiness across the curriculum framework, that's what we've been developing. There's 3 guiding principles for that. On our website, I'll be posting soon some handouts about what this means. Today, I'll be focusing on the second point. But the first is that, again, career readiness is more than just acquiring soft skills. It's partially a problem of getting discipline-specific cultural scripts. The idea here is that employers aren't looking for vague, ambiguous oral communication competencies. They really want students in nursing or in engineering or in history to have those competencies grounded in that field. And the second point, the classroom is the key venue for learning these scripts. Internships are awesome. That's a great way to also become socialized in the discipline, but the classroom here is our key focus. And then the third part of this approach is having faculty and career services engage in curricular mapping to figure out which courses and which experiences are providing students the opportunity for learning skills and about careers. And then helping that inform internal planning and even giving students documents. Here's a pathway for if you want to acquire these skills and experiences. Because right now, we're at a stage where the guided pathways approach was about 15 years ago. And guided pathways is an approach in community colleges to get rid of this overwhelming array of experiences that we provide to students and to give them a more structured entry point into college. Okay, so what I'm going to do in this workshop is go over a couple segments, then we'll have time for some writing reflection and Q&A. And I hope I've timed this properly so that at the very end, we'll have ample time for Q&A. The first major point, though, is thinking of skills as elements of culture. And so what I'm arguing, and this is based on theory from cultural anthropology and the learning sciences, but also our own research where we've gone out in the field and talked to people, employers, faculty, students, about what skills really are, what they mean to them. And the first point I'd like to make is that a community's conceptions of skills encode their beliefs and ideologies about value and appropriate behavior. So consider I'm part Japanese, and I was taught at a very early age about appropriate oral communication when it comes to elders. And that involves being very careful about eye contact. And so there's beliefs and ideologies about how you engage with somebody that's a superior, that's an elder, and your body language and how you engage with them. And this is an aspect of skills that is totally lost when we look at lists of soft skills employers want. Now, this goes both ways, where conception of a skill can also encode ideas that are racist or misogynistic. And so this is where we have to really think deeply about the types of ideologies and beliefs that are encoded in skills from our disciplines, from ourselves, but also what our students bring to the classroom. Now, when it comes to career readiness and going out into the job market, basically students need to master these profession-specific notions of skills. And this is part of the gatekeeping mechanism that we have found in our research. One of the primary screens that employers use, and this is even in the skills-based hiring context, is that of hiring for cultural fit. Now, that's an issue that we have found in our research. It's rife for a lot of discriminatory practices, but understandably, employers, and I'm one of them, when I hire people, I am looking for some alignment or match of this ambiguous notion of culture. And a lot of that has to do with how well can people, in my case, exhibit oral and written communication unique to academic research context. And so again, if we give our students discipline-specific skills, it's going to help them enter the labor market far more if they have these ambiguous oral communication aptitudes. And so when we get these lists of skills, such as soft skills, they're problematic for a whole number of reasons. The one that's most obvious with soft is it implies they're easy to teach and learn, and they're really not. But the other that's, I think, even more harmful is this idea that they're decontextualized, that they can be stripped from time, space, place, and person. And of course, you can't get these in these lists of skills, but we've got to move beyond that. And to illustrate, you see a word cloud here. This is a result of our asking employers in Wisconsin in manufacturing and biotechnology, what kind of skills you want in a college graduate. You can see the first one there in the middle, work ethic. And when we pushed people, and these are hiring managers, supervisors, and CEOs, when we asked them a little bit, what do you mean by that? And again, consider this is the upper Midwest in Wisconsin. We almost to a person heard, well, we love the work ethic that farm kids show, especially that Protestant work ethic. Kids that were in 4-H and they can problem solve well and they just work really hard. Well, when you think about all of the notions of culture, race, and religion that are wrapped up into that, it's intriguing as an analyst, but it's also a little alarming. And so again, the idea is that skills are cultural elements. Okay. So what are they then specifically, and how can we translate that into practical applications? This idea of scripts comes from cognitive psychology, where early research in the 80s found that the way people internalize and memorize information about their worlds and how to act in it properly often comes in sequence actions or scripts. So the definition here is that skills are better thought of as routinized sequences of actions that are tied to performance in specific situations and that particular communities think are normal and acceptable. So what do I mean in practice? Well, the first classic example came again out of cognitive psych from Schenk and Abelson, and that's ordering from a restaurant, where each of us knows, and it's kind of taken for granted, which is another element of culture that's underlying all this. We know that when we go into a restaurant, we are seated, and then we receive a menu, we take a look at it, the server comes, and then we tell them what we want. That's a script for ordering from a menu. Now, when it comes to a cultural script for skills that is more linked to what we're talking about here today, teaching students in higher ed, think about breaking bad news in healthcare. And as I've done this research, I've become a huge fan of medical education because they have taken this idea and in my view, in my backgrounds in anthropology and the learning sciences, they're doing some of the most sophisticated skills-based education that adopts all of these ideas of culture anywhere in higher ed. And one of the key things that is taught, especially in oncology education, is how to break bad news. And there's whole scripts for it that are taught to medical students. Some of the key ideas: you find a quiet location, you ask in a very soft voice about the well-being of the patient or the family member, you ask about support services, and then you tell the news, and then you provide comfort. And so this is through trial and error. This is through realizing in the workplace this wasn't being done well, and it was translated into medical education in a way where we're not just going to teach oral communication in an ambiguous way. We're going to be very detailed and grounded in the actual situation. Another example of a cultural script comes from my field, social science, where I recently taught students how to give a poster. Now, giving a poster is a very weird type of way to engage with people. And I found that students needed to be told, well, you want to dress nicely, stand off to the side, don't block your poster, make eye contact, but don't be too obtrusive. Provide a quick overview, you don't want to read the whole thing, and then allow for questions. And so again, these are the types of cultural scripts that each of us has in our fields and disciplines. Okay, I'm really quickly going to go over this. It's some data from our research that we've done on the nature of oral communication skills in the field, just to provide you some more examples of what I'm talking about with this cultural script idea. What you're looking at is a network graph of how healthcare students conceptualize oral communication. And so the thick dark lines and those themes in the middle are some of the more recurring ways they discussed oral communication. And they talked about it as a sequence, again, a script, where the emphasis is on establishing intersubjectivity, meaning that all parties have the same understanding. And you do that by question and answering and listening. It's done amongst different role groups. So you have specialists, nurses, the family, and it's located at a very specific place at the bedside at the patient. And the overarching goal is to make sure that there's safety involved in the patient's care plan. So again, this is how novices, healthcare students, conceptualize oral communication in their fields. What we found when we then talked to the people that train nurses in hospitals and faculty doing the training, they have the same script, but it's far more complex, it's far more nuanced, and it's far more multidimensional. So they're still emphasizing intersubjectivity, Q&A listening, but they really emphasize jargon translation, that you need people that understand the jargon from nursing and maybe surgery, and they could translate that for the patient and for the rest of the team. Ensuring safety at the bedside is still important, but these experts also located another physical location where this is key, and that's the nursing station. That's where they said they saw a lot of oral communication breakdowns. They also introduced this idea of situational awareness, which is really important in a lot of disciplines, but especially healthcare. And then all the while, and this makes this an extremely complicated, in my view, being non-healthcare, a very challenging way to think about oral communication. You have to do all this while expressing empathy. And so again, one of the challenges that I see in our educational practices, how can we guide students from a novice conception of these skills, or maybe they have no conceptions of them, to expert conceptions of oral communication, teamwork, critical thinking, and so forth. And then how can we do that that introduces them to ideas or notions about real workplaces? So real information about what employment situations and workplaces look like in practice and not in theory. Okay, so now it's time for you to do a little writing if you have pen and paper, or on your laptop. And I'd like you to think about a cultural script from your own profession or discipline, and to be really specific. And it could be communication, teamwork, any of these skills that we all know about. But I'd like you to be specific about the situation, the skill, maybe the sequence, and some of the actions. And then if there's any ways that you are aware of race and ethnicity, social class and gender influencing how these scripts are used, that would be great to know as well. And then you can just put your response in the chat. And if anybody's wondering what that's a picture of, that's an archaeological dig where apparently there's a lot of interesting cultural scripts for certain skills. So if I could just have a couple people share them in the chat, that would be great. That could be just a way for all of us to see how they look in different disciplines. And especially the second point is important if you have any thoughts on that. Okay, would anybody like to verbally share something? Maybe you could raise your hand. Oh, there's one from Samantha. That's a great one, Samantha. Thank you. The script is speaking to authority in higher education, especially from the student faculty perspective. And you're thinking of socioeconomic class and how that influences student comfort. The thing that comes to my mind too is race and ethnicity. Again, speaking of my background in East Asia, a lot of East Asian students are not comfortable in speaking across that authority boundary. But that's a great one. Thank you. And I saw a question on there about reposting the links to the slides, and I'll do that when I'm done with these slides. And Erin is sharing in career advising, especially in a drop-in situation, the way students from different countries think about good customer service. Ooh, that's very interesting. One of the things I hear from students here at UW-Madison, international students, is a pretty strong dissatisfaction with some career services and how it's splintered across units. But I haven't thought about where that comes from with respect to their expectations for customer service, especially in an educational context. Well, this is great. So I think you get the ideas. We can go over some more later if we have time. So the second point that I wanted to make, and then we'll get into the teamwork focus. This is really quick, but it's really explaining why the focus is on the classroom as the venue for learning. Again, career services utilization remains low. Internship participation also remains low, and the number of students that actually wanted to take one being so high is one of the things that's really troubled us as a research group. You know, there's this huge population out there that wants these experiences, but can't get them for a variety of reasons. One of the great things, though, about work integrated learning, and I mentioned this earlier, is how it's so closely aligned with this huge movement of active learning in both secondary schools, but higher education. The shift from the lecture didactic mode of instruction, like I'm doing right now, towards a more engaged, interactive form of teaching and learning, it dovetails perfectly with WIL. The challenge is, and this is the reason I created the faculty development course and I'm doing these workshops, is most of us have not been trained how to teach, period, in higher education, much less in how to really think about skills from a nuanced or cultural perspective, and how to really kind of bring in ideas of the workplace and career development into our curriculum. It's not an easy thing to do. The way I've seen it being done in some institutions sometimes is, again, with medical education, remarkably sophisticated, but other times it leaves a lot to be desired. And so this is there's a lot of room for growth in higher education as we do this work. Besides medical education, I've also become a huge fan of communication studies. And some of my colleagues in communication departments have pointed me to this idea of communication in the disciplines. And this is the same idea that I was talking about before, where communication across the curriculum, which is very common on many campuses, it's great. You know, we want all instructors to have access to insights about how we can teach our students good forms of oral communication. But what scholars in this field found over time is, well, we then need to go the next step and make this uniquely tailored to an engineering classroom or a history classroom, because there are certain things about the way engineers talk in the profession that historians may not. And so taking it to this next level, which again, my colleagues in communication have done and medical education, is something that ideally we'll see across all the disciplines. And so the approach that we've developed, which we call the Teaching as Cultural Scripts approach, and again, on our website, I'll be posting some handouts as soon as our graphic designer finishes them up, that lay out this sequence of steps. It really starts, this is basically backwards design applied to this idea of scripts and skills, where instead of just starting with the content-based learning goal, you start with the skill. Okay, oops, I'm sorry. You know, is it oral communication? Well, let's start with that skill and let's really specify what it looks like in practice. Ideally, then it's connected to the material. Okay, it's not detached from the syllabus or the readings. And then, despite a lot of arguments that we need to get rid of lectures, there definitely is a place, or as it was famously said in the learning sciences, the time for telling. There's a place for lecturing, and this is really important with skills. And it's one of the steps that I found many faculty realize, oh, I'm already teaching that skill. I just forgot to tell the students about it. And so this is before you embark on that activity, really pausing and telling students what the skill is. Okay, this is oral communication about how to break bad news. You tell them why it's important. Well, when you go out in the workplace, you're going to be doing this maybe every day. And then really emphasizing why you're embedding it into the class. Next, you got to model it. This is something that's where role play simulations are probably one of the best pedagogical approaches. But you or an expert or somebody on video models that skill. It could be problem solving, how you think through the logic of a computation, but demonstrating how to use that skill and also how not to. So in medical ed, you often see people giving demonstrations of, well, this is how you break bad news in a good, mediocre, and awful way. After you model it, then you provide opportunities for practice. This is where active learning comes in. And then one of the core ideas and what we've learned about learning is that giving students feedback. They need to hear about how they did in really clear and specific terms. And so this is kind of a continuum, just an approach, adapting ideas of backwards design from instructional design to the teaching of skills with this cultural approach. So many of you probably were curious coming to this workshop, trying to find out some specific methods. And again, this is really important, finding out, well, what are the techniques that we can use to teach these? But they have to be sandwiched around those other things, identifying the skill, telling students what it is, modeling it, doing these activities, and then feedback. Okay, but some of them, and again, each of these methods, some of you probably know about, and there's lots of training and curricular materials out there. The one difference in the approach that we're sharing is that you need that cultural script at the heart of this. And so with the role play or simulation, which again is very common, you have the cultural script to be the heart of it. And that's a method actually that requires it. So that's an easy one. But things like small group discussions or problem-based learning or more specialized pedagogical approaches like process-oriented group integrated learning, sometimes these are used without a specific skill or cultural script named for the students. And then it's even less common to have that specific skill grounded in a specific cultural environment of a profession or a workplace. But again, these are different types of active learning approaches where skills can be easily taught to students while not deviating from the material and engaging them in practice with some of these cultural scripts. And so we'll just spend a little bit of time on this because I want to dive into teamwork. But if you could just jot down some active learning methods that you've seen or that you've used as an instructor that explicitly feature a disciplinary cultural script or career-related information, and maybe one that you found worked really well, then you can share it in the chat. Okay, thank you, Donna. You've used scenarios and videos as situations that can go wrong and have students analyze them. That's a great example. From Carol, an hour-long mocktail reception for students to learn how to network. And this is something I hear from a lot of students. They're very intimidated about this idea of networking outside of social media or LinkedIn. Great, Sarah and Brian, thank you. So there's some great ideas in the chat if you're interested to see what some of your colleagues are using out in the field. And so now we'll shift into teamwork and we'll have plenty of time for a Q&A at the end. Again, teamwork is one of the most highly valued workplace skills. We see them on those lists of skills employers want, NACE career readiness competencies and so forth. And they can include scripts such as coordinating amongst a patient care team, working in a lab. You could think of a lot of different ways teamwork is used in the professions. It's been something that has been studied in a lot of different disciplines, education, HR, management, social and cognitive psychology. And there's been a lot of research on how effective team or collaborative-based learning is in the college classroom. One of the things, though, that is really clear is that a lot of team-based approaches require a lot of preparatory work for students. So we don't just go in and we start teaching teamwork off the bat, or we throw them into group projects. I'm sure many of you have done group work projects and you've found this out, maybe the hard way, like I have. But some of the key things that are just known in the field from trial and error and years of experience is discussing expectations for group work. What's appropriate behavior amongst team members and for the performance of the project? Some instructors set ground rules for behavior with the class. Some of them tell them what the ground rules are, and others let the students themselves figure out these ground rules. But figuring out some norms for team interactions is key. You also have to think about grading. Is it going to be a group grade, an individual grade? And then how do you deal with so-called slackers? This is a term used in the cooperative learning literature. The people that are just not going to do the work. How's it dealt with within the team, but also by the instructor? You also have to think through the length of the activity. Is it going to be a semester-long project? Is it going to be just one class? How to create groups. You'll see in a short video I'm about to show, you can use playing cards and randomly assign groups. There's online group generators. You got to think through all this stuff. And then creating engaging tasks. Is it a problem that they're going to go out and find from the field, like some problem-based learning activities? Or is it a really short-term task they can do within one class session? And again, grading. So teamwork, I found as I've done these classes, it's something that a lot of instructors are not really, they don't realize how much work goes in before the actual group activity. But it requires a lot of preparatory planning. Donna, thank you. Yes, assigning roles to group members, who's a note taker, who's the boss. This is something you need to think about, and this is where randomization may come into play as well. One of the things too that I'll mention is before all of this happens, you think back to that 6-step teaching as a cultural script idea. Before launching into assigning people and giving them roles, we need to explain why we're doing it. Why are there different roles? And trying to link this as much as possible to the way group work is used in your discipline or your occupation. That's the one missing link sometimes I see in instruction about teamwork, because we can create artificial collaborative learning activities in the college classroom that don't really look like what they're going to see when they go out into the world of work. And so trying to bridge that gap a little bit, I think, is one of the key challenges. So again, I have a short video here from University of Washington. And as you watch this, this is a twofer. It's a way for you to get some ideas about teaching teamwork, but I also would like you to think about whether or not this idea of cultural scripts or career-related information is being embedded in some of what is talked about in the video.
A UW education is a preparation.
And can you all hear that? Can I see a thumbs up? Okay.
We need to make sure
Matthew, I can't hear it. I don't know if others can't either.
I am sorry about that. So some of you can hear and some can't. Okay. Well, this is how I'm going to deal with this pedagogical situation. You can see the YouTube there. I encourage you to take a look at it. Essentially, it is this dean talking about its importance, and then two faculty describing the types of approaches they use in the classroom. One is they use randomized cards to assign students into different groups before lessons. The other, it's in a larger lecture hall, again, where small collaborative learning takes place around group projects. But one of the things that I found interesting from this video, and maybe I set this up, you can anticipate what I'm going to say, is in one of the cases, they were able to bring in references to the workplace. In the other, they were not. And I think teaching teamwork in both cases is going to be effective, where the students are going to leave that class session learning more about how to collaborate, interact, and so forth. But only one is going to make that explicit jump to what this means for them as they go out post-graduation and what this may look like when they get a job in whatever field they are. So apologies about that technical situation. So again, taking it one step further away from just a focus on small group learning, think pair shares, problem-based learning, identifying specific scripts, making sure that we model them for the students as instructors, making it clear what this looks like out in the workforce. And then I really recommend starting small, where some of the ways of teaching teamwork are rather complex. And so starting small, maybe low stakes, think, pair, share within a classroom, just to get students accustomed to talking to one another, working together, maybe on a discrete problem set, and then scaffolding it to larger, more complicated research projects, presentations, and so forth. But again, the main idea I'm hoping you walk away from our short hour together is layering in this idea of cultural scripts to the teaching of teamwork before, during, and after the activity. And that's it. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to get in touch. I'll post the SlideShare URL for the slides. And with that, I guess we can do questions since my video that didn't work leaves us a few minutes.
Matthew, I'm from the University of West Florida, and I want to thank you for your time. And I also have a question / a consideration. I looked at the model that you have to implement this into our classrooms, and I was curious about when you have opportunities for practice and then giving feedback. Could we incorporate reflection into that? Reflection into after we practice with the students or after we give them feedback? Where does reflection fit in your mindset?
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. That's a great point. And one of the other skills that I feature in the longer course, self-regulated learning, really goes deep on that. And having that be part of this process, I think it was one of the last points, but it definitely is part of it. It probably needs to be emphasized a little bit more, maybe in my remarks and my writing in this approach. But definitely it's super important to have students think about whether it's writing, verbal, with the instructor or with one another, about how they performed, how things went, maybe things that can be improved. And so I think there's ample research that reflection is a key part of learning, having students, realize what they can improve, what went well, and then that sets them up for the next activity or the next stage. So yeah, does that answer your question, or did you have any further ideas, like it could be emphasized a little bit more?
No, I just we talk a lot about reflection on our campus. So I wanted to see where it would best fit in, either at the end or in the middle.
Yes, thank you. I think one thing that I've found in giving these talks is that a lot of students do bring up the issue of race, ethnicity, class, and gender, and how these skills are constructed and valued. And so I have been, told you should also include time for reflection about that. Was the skill, the way it was presented and discussed, culturally responsive? Another thing that I've heard too, and again, I mentioned this earlier, is that some of the skills in our professions may encode discriminatory beliefs. And so we have to be really careful about, what we're conveying and if we're unintentionally doing that. Okay, I have a question from Samantha, cultural scripts. assumes a contextual basis, not innate cultural capital. Ooh, that's a great question. Samantha, can I mull that one over and maybe get back to you?
Yes, you can, absolutely.
Yeah, but would you like to articulate a little bit more? I understand what you're saying, but
I think what I'm suggesting here is that to see whether or not cultural scripts can exist from an EDI perspective alongside the conversation around acculturation, I assume this is all for the purpose of student success, which would of course be contextual to their local community and upbringing in that way, and also assuming this is for the goal of career readiness. So just kind of wondering what your thoughts and opinions are around that conversation, especially for those international students that may have innate cultural capital that differs from the one they currently exist in.
Yeah, that's great. So I have some colleagues working on the idea of community cultural wealth, which is essentially an argument that low-income students, students of color, minoritized students have assets, not just deficits, when it comes to different forms of social capital, cultural capital, professional networks, and so forth, when it comes to careers. And so this is a really important topic. And so thinking about some of the things that our students are bringing to our classrooms from an asset-based framework and how that can be incorporated with maybe disciplinary or professional norms or expectations, it is a challenge. I'm not sure I have a pat answer. I think just as instructors, us being aware that that is a dynamic, and that, again, if I was going to be developing a class with a specific eye towards getting my students to be hired by a rural Wisconsin manufacturing firm, I know what their screening procedures are. Again, that Protestant work ethic idea is at the top of their list. And so it becomes a question, how do you talk to an international student who doesn't match that if they want to enter that profession in that place? It's very tricky, but I think the first step is just being aware that these dynamics exist and that we have to think about it. But yeah, Samantha, feel free to reach out more if you have any further thoughts, and I'm going to mull that one over.
Will do. Thank you for those thoughts. I think it is equally important to recognize those tensions that exist. So thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, Matthew, I had a question that I posted in the chat. How familiar are you with rich skill descriptors and the Open Skills Network? And to what extent do you think they support or conflict with the concept of cultural scripts?
Thank you, Brian. I am not. And so after this talk, I will become familiarized. Did you have any thoughts about similarities or differences?
I guess what I'm struggling with is to try and get this to scale among faculty. It seems a little daunting.
Yes. One of the things I heard from a biologist after my last workshop and also at my AACNU presentation was basically what you're suggesting is we need to have inventories of these cultural scripts for each discipline. Mm-hmm. And then for the disciplines that don't have students that are going into one job, like English or chemistry, you have to think about, okay, which of these scripts then are applicable to multiple career pathways, and maybe do we need even subfields within some departments? And so that is a challenge, I think, for instructors who don't have firsthand knowledge with non-academic work settings, unless they're training their students to become academics. And we actually have done some recent research on the number of instructors with industry experience in the United States, and it's rather low. And so this question of, well, how do you scale this up for all the instructors that don't have firsthand knowledge is difficult. And then how do you do it across the disciplines? So one of the things we're thinking of doing is starting to build that inventory and have it be a grassroots faculty-led effort. So it's not just us researchers saying, here's your cultural scripts, biologists, but having them come organically from the field so that we could start to develop, again, an inventory so people know what we're talking about.
Yeah, I like that idea.
Okay, well, with that, we're at time, and I wanted to thank you all for joining. I'm doing these again once a month, hopefully the 7-week. When I'm actually thinking of condensing it to 4-week because nobody has time for 7 weeks. That course should be ready in the end of the spring, early summer, and it's going to be an edX course and also a Canvas course hosted at UW Madison. But thank you for your time. We're all busy, and you just took an hour out of your day. And if you have any questions or comments, don't hesitate to reach out. But have a great Thursday, everyone, especially if you're in Florida or Georgia and it's above 26 degrees. Bye-bye.